What happened to Retsu, man? Seriously, when he was first introduced during Grappler Baki's Maximum Tournament arc, he was an absolute powerhouse that pushed Baki to near defeat, as well as dispatching every opponent he faced in that arc with relative ease. He even one-shotted Katsumi Orochi, the inheritor of Shinshinkai karate. I mean, come on. But only after a few short arcs from this point, and he's killed by a resurrected Miyamoto Musashi who cuts him up like he's meat on a chopping board. Was this a slow and steady downfall over time, or had Retsu simply been unlucky in challenging two of the strongest beings at that time in the world of Baki? I'm not sure, but let's take a look anyway and come to our own conclusions. Once you've liked and subscribed, of course. Kaioh Retsu's first appearance comes in chapter 185 of Grappler Baki, right at the start of the Maximum Tournament. He's basically a cameo appearance at this point. Baki swings open the door to the underground arena and brags to Kozue that these are all his opponents. There's also Mike Tyson or Iron Michael, and someone that's clearly supposed to be the Ultimate Warrior, but like legally distinct enough. Retsu is a proud practitioner of Chinese Kenpo and is a representative of its 4,000 years of teaching and practice. And I need to emphasize there the word proud, because if there's one way you can anger Retsu enough, it's to talk smack about Kung Fu, which is surprising because within his own temple, his strength is absolutely unquestioned and his abilities far surpass most. In fact, he's known as a genius, but he's kind of a rebel slash bad boy who runs away to take part in the Maximum Tournament, and thank God he did, because his fights can be counted as some of the best in the entire tournament. Before his first fight, he confronts Katsumi Orochi about his comments on having surpassed Chinese Kenpo, which to Retsu is just fighting words. He's ready to sack off the tournament right then and there and smack Katsumi into next weekend. That is until his actual opponent confronts him and says something that offends Retsu even more. Unfortunately for Sergei Taktarov, he is just fodder for Retsu, who dispatches him in no time with his move, the Spinning Lotus, which looks like instant death to me, but apparently it's not. Also, everyone is amazed at his physique in this reveal, and yeah, it's very impressive, but even at this point in the story, I thought most of the fighters were built like this. Maybe it's those giant lats or something. He goes to the gym, he works at his lats, at his biceps, you know.
Okay, and I want to get my pecs and lats and shit like that, right? You know what I'm talking about.
In his second round fight, Retsu was pitted against the world of professional wrestling in the form of Mount Toba, and we also get the reveal of what I said earlier about Retsu being a troublemaker through some flashbacks. This is a 10-ton bell he destroyed on his way out. Dick move, but okay. Again, Retsu shows his composure and ferocity by making very quick work of Toba by attacking his already weakened knee. He gives Toba the opportunity to surrender and avoid further damage, and he does. Fair enough. That's two pretty quick wins so far. And Retsu's penultimate display of the superiority of Chinese Kenpo comes at the expense of Katsumi Orochi, son of Doppo Orochi and the inheritor of Shinshinkai karate, like I just mentioned. Remember, very negative sentiment between the two has been brewing throughout the day, and finally we get to see who is truly stronger out of the two. To cut a long story short, it's Retsu. And I don't actually mean a long story because he wins very easily. So easily, in fact, that when I read this for the first time, I thought it was a joke. It honestly reminds me of Baki's fight against Ali Jr. You know, because Ali Jr. had been the main focus of attention throughout his own mini arc. He's tried to steal Baki's girlfriend. And then at the height of his hubris, he gets absolutely humbled by Baki in one quick kick to the nuts. Same thing with Katsumi. Only in this instance, Retsu uses a technique where he shoots compressed air that temporarily blinds Katsumi before he gets 1-inch punched straight into the stand. Retsu tells him that whilst he and his karate is impressive, it's still 2,000 years behind Chinese Kenpo. And after that schooling, Katsumi falls to his knees unconscious. I love Itagaki for moments like this that seriously undercut tension and subvert our expectations. I also do feel like we were robbed of a great fight, but hey, we definitely get one almost immediately after this. And these two go on to become good friends after the tournament is over, and the two even get pretty well attached to each other. Am I right? You know, because of the arm. Please don't click off this video. Anyway, with Katsumi thoroughly beaten, we get on to Retsu's best fight in the series, his bout with Baki Hanma. To preface this, Retsu has been approached by Yujiro at the start of this fight, who's basically there to just stir the pot and accuse Retsu of being scared of a teenager. He does a bit of aura farming and leaves. Classic Yujiro stuff. But back to the fight we've all been waiting for, and Retsu is all alone in the ring waiting for Baki to appear, which he does dramatically by jumping from the top of the stands into the open arena. Covered in bruises and scrapes, Baki, with all sincerity, tells Retsu that he's now experienced all 4,000 years of Chinese martial arts and had already won his fight against Retsu before it even began. Mysterious, sure. and we'll get to the explanation shortly. To prove that he has learned and experienced all of Chinese Kempo, Baki starts the fight off by using Retsu's own move against him, the Spinning Lotus, which Retsu angrily counters until he's on the receiving end of a truly vicious uppercut. And I really have to stress this is the first blow that anyone has landed on Retsu this entire tournament. Like, let that sink in. Taktarov, Toba, and Katsumi all failed to even slightly damage Retsu. He's been an absolute beast throughout this tournament, and even he's reeling from the shock of being hit. Probably more so because he's been hit rather than the damage he's received. Retsu does quickly recover from these series of hits designed to knock him out cold, but Baki states that this is all going according to the rehearsal. I will explain this in the other point, just hang on. Baki then demonstrates his control over his own brain chemistry by inducing an endorphin rush, which is something that calls back to his childhood training and fight against the Yasha ape. By the way, I hate when Baki does the endorphin thing. It's so uncomfortable to read or watch, and if you know what I'm talking about, then you know what I mean. You know what I mean. Baki again mysteriously shows off his Chinese Kempo knowledge by engaging Retsu in a kung fu exchange. But ultimately, Retsu is no longer caught off guard by this and delivers the same 1-inch punch that ended his fight against Katsumi. He goes flying for 6 or 7 meters. Don't! Stop it! Stop! But gets back up and launches an attack at Retsu, who sees through every punch and counters him effectively before beginning his own attack and wounding Baki. Baki lashes out with a kick to Retsu's head, which he allows to happen to almost no effect, highlighting the distance in skill and resilience between the two fighters at that moment in time. And speaking of time, Retsu takes this opportunity to school Baki and the audience on the history of Chinese Kempo and the ancient Greco-Roman martial art of pankration. Of course he does. Which was originally an ancient Greek fighting style that was fought competitively, and the Romans stole it like they did lots of Greek culture. But anyway, we're going to get into colonialism, and I don't want to do that right now. Pancration's making a comeback. I mean, watch this space. According to Retsu, the reason that pancration lost popularity in ancient times wasn't because audiences wanted to see more fights to the death or daring stunts. It's because a lone Chinese Kempo master paved the way for more Chinese martial artists to make the pilgrimage to Rome to kick the shit out of the locals and become champions in the ring. This eventually forced the Romans to end the practice of pancration, as they knew that no Roman could use that fighting style to beat a practitioner of Chinese Kempo. Does this sound familiar at all? Because it should. Retsu sees himself as this representative Chinese martial arts, and he's made his warrior's pilgrimage not only to test himself as a fighter, but also to prove that Chinese martial arts stands at the top of the fighting world. And to go an extra step further, he's also here to metaphorically destroy all other martial arts. He's like a Chinese Kempo supremacist. He hates all the other martial arts because he only believes in Chinese Kempo. Retsu takes his shoes off and lets his dogs out, which turns out to be his secret weapon. Imagine, he's handicapped himself for the entirety of the maximum tournament up until this point. But how can wearing shoes be a handicap? Well, that's because Retsu has trained every part of himself, including his feet, which he uses to grip Baki's hair and deliver a brutal knee to the chin. We now see Doppo Orochi watching on as Retsu demonstrates the strength of just his bare feet, which is fitting and makes sense as Orochi himself, as a karateka, also lives by the philosophy of turning your appendages and individual body parts into weapons, which would make sense seeing as how karate is largely inspired by kung fu. Baki is then manhandled by Retsu a bit more, and the two trade blows until Retsu uses what appears to be a pressure point hitting move that leaves Baki debilitated. I'm going to switch between Baki and Baki like a lot, by the way. This includes some type of hit to the knee, then a concussive punch to the ears, followed up by spear hands to the rear before a final kick to the throat. Retsu beats Baki into such a state of agony that it honestly looks like he might go all the way and win this fight. But the series is called Grappler Baki, not Kaioh Retsu, so you know how this is going to go eventually. Retsu, in a display of his overwhelming confidence and belief that he's won this fight, sticks his hands in his belt to signify that he plans on only using kicks from this point on in the fight, which is just so disrespectful, it's funny. But in fairness, he absolutely is beating the life out of Baki, who, after getting kicked in the throat again, slumps to the floor, admitting that he's beaten in every way, but that this is still going just like his rehearsal. Remember all the mysterious things Baki was saying about how he'd already won and this is just like the rehearsal? Well, we get an explanation now from the man himself. Essentially, Baki can use his immense imagination to bring certain things into reality. He demonstrates this by imagining his palm being cut by a blade, and whilst no real knife is there, a cut forms on his hand. It's a lot to actually get your head around, and it's one of the more ridiculous aspects of Baki, which is saying a lot. But this is a technique that Baki will continue to use continues pretty much to this day in the series. And to further prove it, Baki has a quick imaginary fight right then and there in the ring for the audience to see. He even starts showing signs of new injuries like a bleeding nose and scrapes. This is the rehearsal he was talking about. This was how Baki had experienced all 4,000 years of Chinese Kempo. It's because in the time before the match started, he'd already perfectly imagined a fight with Retsu, fought that fight, and won, making this fight here the second time he's fought Retsu. And I know that this is a Retsu specific video, but this here had to be explained because we saw what an imaginary Retsu was capable of doing to Baki, and now we're seeing the combined damage of the imaginary and real thing. As Retsu puts it, it's like shadow boxing, but taking it to its absolute extreme. With the fight effectively restarted, our two fighters punch, kick, and dodge with renewed strength and understanding of one another. But Retsu, again, gains the upper hand, uses his air cannon blinding technique that he used on Katsumi, kicks Baki in the nuts, strikes him at least 10 times, and finishes this combo by shoving his fingers in Baki's eardrums. Nasty stuff. All this happens, by the way, as Yujiro just watches on and calls his son a good boy. Real father material as always there from Yujiro. But this is the point that shows how important Baki's fight against Retsu was, and it's because it served a very specific purpose. As Yujiro tells us, the audience, none of the fights that Baki has fought to this point has been enough to awaken the Hanma blood within him. Nothing has pushed Baki in the way Retsu has. Not Hanayama or Gaia or the Yasha Ape, Dr. Kureha or Zulu. Only Retsu and 4,000 years of Chinese Kempo are capable of awakening his monstrous blood and violent inheritance, which finally does awaken after Retsu shoves his finger all the way deep into Baki's belly button, which makes me physically recoil and pretty nauseous just thinking about it. So instead of ending the fight then and there, Retsu accidentally unleashes the monster side of Baki for the first time and awakens the ogre within him, who repays Retsu by snapping his neck clean, seemingly killing him, until Retsu decides he's not dead and unsnaps his own neck and picks up the fight right from where they left it. But in a complete reversal of how the majority of this fight was panning out, Baki dodges and slips through all of Retsu's moves before landing a kick on Retsu's seriously injured neck, bringing this fight to a final end. It's worth noting as well that in this final exchange of blows, Retsu is sort of on autopilot, which is some headcanon from me, as we can't see his pupils, which normally in anime and manga conveys either extreme aggression or unconsciousness. But as we'll see in another 2 fights, Retsu is capable of reacting unconsciously, so I don't think it's much of a stretch. So, before we move on to Retsu's next set of battles, let's just take a moment to appreciate how important he was narratively at this part of the series. As an unknown entity, he made quick work of 2 fighters we come to know quite well, that being Mount Toba and Katsumi, and had pushed our protagonist so far that he resorted to savagery and emulated his father Yujiro to win. Kind of an arse pull, kind of plot armor. It's not a stretch to say that until this point, Retsu was one of Baki's most important and formative opponents, and sadly, his importance stays the same, but so does roughly his level of skill. Oh yeah, also he survived his neck being broken because he disconnected his spine from the base of his skull, purposely to lessen the damage. Okay, buddy, you do you. Anyway, Baki goes on to win the whole tournament, and Retsu is there to congratulate and joke around with him. Retsu comes away from the maximum tournament noticeably humbler, more experienced, kinder, and with a new and respectful view towards other forms of martial arts and their practitioners. He joins the main cast of fighters from this point on and is a firm friend of Baki, Katsumi, Doppo, and the others. So yeah, that's Retsu's introduction to Baki. He has a pretty full-on character arc and some seriously impressive fights to go with it, and things continue to go quite well for him in the Death Row Convicts and Raitai Tournament sagas. And speaking of the Death Row inmates, Retsu has quite a strong connection to 2 of these antagonists, that being Dorian, who also holds the rank of Kaioh, and Doyle, who Retsu beats in battle, and the 2 of them then take turns saving the other's life. I'll get to that last bit in a minute. But back to Dorian, and he achieved the rank of Kaioh and left the temple before Retsu joined. He's effectively Retsu's senior, and they even share the same master, Kaioh Ryu. We learn through flashbacks that Dorian was one of the few Westerners to earn Kaioh status, something that enrages a young Retsu, and that rather than having created a sphere by striking rock with his bare hands like the Kaiohs before him, including Retsu, Dorian had been of such strength that he'd carved an entire tunnel with his bare hands and feet in a single night. In fact, Dorian's feat and strengths are what prevent Retsu from achieving Kaioh status at a younger age, because he set such a high standard from that moment on. Upon meeting for the second time, Retsu bows and acknowledges Dorian. Dorian likewise acknowledges Retsu and comments that he heard the stories some 30 years before that a young genius with incredible abilities had been born and would go on to earn the title of Kaioh. With the 2 fully acquainted, Retsu declares that as they are both students of the same master, by temple or kung fu law, the two are not actually allowed to fight one another, which is fine because there's a long queue of fighters that do want to fight Dorian. Dorian goes on to fight Toba Orochi in various underhanded ways, quite literally, and you can really feel the sense that Dorian is rapidly losing his mind, what with all the singing and shaking and outward displays of fear. After having blown off Doppo's face, he runs into Retsu and the two have a conversation about the nature and definition of strength. Retsu goes on to say that Dorian, an undefeated man who longs for defeat, has never truly won anything as a result. It's kind of like a Chairman Netero situation for the Hunter x Hunter fans out there. He's simply been too strong his whole life, and as a result, everything bores him. Having already been quite severely wounded, Retsu delivers a single punch to Dorian as the latter internally accepts his defeat and is reduced to the mental state of a child. On the ambulance ride to the hospital, Dorian asks for candy, and a tearful Retsu promises to get him all the candy he wants as the true tragedy of Kaioh Dorian's life sets in. In many ways, Dorian is a reflection, and that's all I've written. What the fuck? Retsu and Doyle meet by pure coincidence in a lift while shopping, and rather than duking it out then and there, which Retsu is ready to do, the two go for a drink and a chat before fists and knives start flying. Retsu says he doesn't care if Doyle uses explosives or any other underhanded way of fighting, which he says just before Doyle attempts to light him on fire. However, Retsu is prepared, and for his trouble, Doyle gets a throwing knife to the eye and then gets set on fire himself. Retsu didn't come here to play. Interestingly, with this battle, we get to see Retsu show us how proficient he is with Chinese weaponry, something that will actually lead to his own downfall by the end of his personal arc. Anyway, Doyle gets properly humbled by a knife-wielding Retsu who makes an absolute pincushion out of him, and their fight stumbles out into the street. Doyle gets blinded, bound, whatever, and then sliced up by a now sword-wielding Retsu. Importantly to note with this fight, Retsu is pretty much back to his old self. He thinks Doyle is disrespecting Chinese Kenpo, and he's going to teach him a severe lesson. I choose to believe that this level of brutality from Retsu comes from him still coming to terms with his brief altercation with Dorian, and the sort of tragedy of that situation. He's got a lot to work out right now, and Doyle is on the receiving end of it. A one-eyed Doyle manages to get a knife in Retsu's back, just missing his spinal cord, and then gets pummeled for the attempt. But the fight isn't over there. Retsu uses his staff to remove the knives in Doyle and gives him an opportunity to accept defeat, which he doesn't, and attempts to use one of his many freaky body implants, which Retsu dodges and proceeds to beat Doyle again like a drum. On the brink of defeat, Baki Hanma, of all people, intervenes and sedates Retsu so that he can then challenge Doyle to a fight at a later date. And I've got to mention, how the fuck does the massive mountain Baki Hanma sneak up on anyone? Credit to him. That's kind of impressive. As Doyle leaves to recover, some guys try to mug Retsu and Doyle intervenes and then spends an entire night protecting Retsu's body from dogs and other threats because Retsu beat some respect into him, maybe? Upon waking and seeing the nearly dead Doyle, Retsu is confused at why he saved his life, but in that moment realized that he now also owes Doyle a debt of gratitude and decides to save his life in return. So he ties him to his back and runs him across Tokyo to the Shinshinkai Karate Hospital. He swings around like Spider-Man, destroys a motorcycle, and then runs on water in an effort to save Doyle's life, which he does. Doyle goes on to live and cause more havoc and mayhem, but this is a Retsu video, so let's just get back to it. A few episodes and chapters on from this, Baki has been poisoned by an ancient Chinese assassination technique known as the poison hand. Retsu is familiar with the technique and encourages Baki to join him in his journey to China to take part in the Raitai Tournament. And by encourage, I mean he assaults a poisoned and dying Baki and basically kidnaps him. But it's for his own good, so it's fine. After some time at the Beilin Temple where Retsu was trained, Retsu informs his master Kaioh Ryu that Baki will be participating in the Raitai Tournament, much to Ryu's anger. Kaioh Ryu brings up the fact that he had heard rumors that Retsu had been defeated by a 17-year-old boy recently and wishes to have the next strongest fighter at the temple fight Baki right now. Baki wins, of course, and Retsu reveals that he has belief that by fighting strong enemies in this tournament, he'll overcome the poisoning and be cured. Somehow. Oh, and to sweeten the deal, Retsu tells Baki that Yujiro will also be participating, and the two may have an opportunity to battle it out, which makes this an instant yes for Baki. Luckily for Retsu, he was correct about Baki being cured at this tournament. He faces off against Kaioh Lee, gets a second dose of the poison hand mixed with some tears from Kozue, and he is mystically cured. Retsu prepares him a big meal and some sugar water, and Baki almost instantly recovers. And we need to talk about this new Retsu. He's come so far from the version of him we saw at the maximum Tournament. He's gone from despising all other types of martial arts other than Chinese Kempo to advocating for all these non-Kung Fu fighters to take part in the Raitai Tournament. And he goes on to keep warning his fellow fighters that these foreigners need to be taken seriously or they will completely beat China and its 4,000-year history of martial arts. In Retsu's first fight in the Raitai Tournament, he faces off against Kaioh Son, who brags about his grip strength, which Retsu compares to Hanayama's and declares it inadequate. In a grip fight, he overwhelms Son and demands that he renounce his Kaioh title before knocking him out with a light chop to the back of the head. Retsu is back in tournaments, flexing on his enemies and defeating them with little to no trouble. And I can't even say he's really back because he still has only lost to Baki so far in the story. I think this next fight is objectively Retsu's worst fight, only because it's not much of a fight. Retsu takes on Kaioh Jaku, who invites him to shake hands, which he does, at which point Jaku attempts to spinning backhand punch him, only to realize that Retsu won't give him the opportunity to do so. Jaku is the master of cheap shots and cheap tricks. They shake hands again and Retsu counters his throw with a throw of his own. Much to the audience's dismay, they shake hands for a third time, which Retsu uses to lift Jaku off the ground and pummel him with his free hand. However, Jaku gets the better of Retsu this time and throws him on his head before dislocating his arm at the elbow. Retsu declares the playing field is now level, and Jaku declares that by winning here, he will bring Retsu back to Japan with him to train the next generation of martial artists. I really feel like he could have just asked Retsu to do this. There's a good chance he'd be down for it. We see the return of Retsu's ability to grab things with his feet, and Jaku can't seem to land any major hits against Retsu until he grabs Retsu's pressure point above the ankle, called the 3-yin intersection, which causes extreme pain, apparently. Is that as much pain as it must feel like to have your beard suddenly turn into mutton chops? Probably not, but that's what Retsu does with the power of his grippers. It's not even a bad look for Jaku, to be honest. For the 4th time, Jaku initiates a handshake, which Retsu meets with his damaged right hand, which he kindly repairs for him, and the two start their fight over. Retsu thanks Jaku for this by unleashing a flurry of punches and kicks that eventually forces Jaku to turtle up and defend himself in the funniest and most cowardly way possible. Jaku baits Retsu into attacking him, busts his nose pretty good, and then returns to his cowardly self-defense tactic, which really starts to enrage Retsu. After more beatings and what looks like a popped spine disc, Retsu is declared the winner. And sadly, this is where things start to take a turn for Retsu. From this point on, his 2 most important fights end up with him losing in 2 pretty devastating ways. And I do want to stress most important, because after Retsu's loss to Pickle, he travels to the United States to prove to the world that Kempo is superior to boxing. He fights a bunch of boxing champions and wins, but I never really liked or understood the point of this arc, so I'm not going to do it a disservice by covering it here. Instead, I'm going to cover Retsu's loss to Pickle and Miyamoto Musashi, the latter of which ending with the death of Kaioh Retsu. Spoilers, I guess. We're at 40 minutes now on this recording. Holy shit. Retsu's desire to fight Pickle comes from a place of, again, wanting to prove that Chinese Kempo can overcome anything and that he, as its representative, must be the one to do so. So, it's the 200-million-year-old caveman versus 4,000 years of Chinese Kempo. What could go wrong? Everything. Everything could go wrong. Retsu uses every drop of skill he has at his disposal and barely manages to rattle Pickle. What looks like an impressive series of kicks and punches barely tickles. Pickle? And after a single blow from Pickle, Retsu is unconscious until he awakes to find a bite missing out of his shoulder. Pickle then takes a second bite and Retsu takes his shoes off in order to fight at his strongest. But again, this does nothing to help, and Retsu, in a moment of desperation, casts aside Chinese Kempo and disavows it, which is so important to Retsu's character that it really can't be understated. Retsu is Chinese Kempo. He lives and breathes it, and for him to forsake it means he must forsake a large part of himself and his identity. In truth, it's quite sad. Retsu's faith dies in this moment, and so does some of his credibility. As he's there swinging his arms like a child having a fight in the playground, people just look on in shock and sadness, believing Retsu to have mentally snapped. But in a moment where Pickle is about to attack him again, Retsu's body moves on its own to defend him, similarly to how he responded when Baki broke his neck in the Maximum Tournament. Shocked at his body's own ability to defend itself, Retsu re-embraces Kung Fu and his ideal self. With renewed trust in his martial arts, Retsu starts to lay the beat down on Pickle and knocks him on his front. As the fight looks to be heating up, Pickle takes his crouched charging stance and Retsu looks to meet him but is hopelessly outclassed yet again. Retsu is defeated and knocked out of the ring, and Pickle goes to claim his prize, making a meal of Retsu's leg until he is rendered unconscious. As a result of Retsu's second loss in the series, there's a very noticeable tone shift. Against Pickle, you realize that it's possible for some of your favorite characters in Baki to actually die, which isn't something that's really happened so far. And to be fair, it doesn't actually happen in this stage of the story. But also, by losing a leg, Retsu has gained some serious battle damage and can be respected for it. Toba Orochi lost his eye to Yujiro, Shibukawa lost his eye to Yanagi, and both of them went on to continue being warriors in the modern age. It's like an elite club. Weirdly, Retsu learns a valuable lesson about himself and Kung Fu that day and helps prepare Katsumi for his own fight against Pickle. Skipping ahead past Retsu's boxing career, he returns to Japan after footage of Miyamoto Musashi is shared online. As a practitioner of martial arts and a true warrior, Retsu knows that he must challenge Musashi on behalf of the pride of Chinese Kempo heritage. In many ways, this fight is what he imagined his fight with Pickle to be, but unlike Pickle, Retsu's fight with Musashi represents a true clashing of fighting styles from similar points in time, meeting and determining which can be considered superior. Unfortunately for Retsu though, much like in his fight against Pickle, he is utterly and hopelessly outclassed. Despite learning Shaori from Kaioh Kaku, briefly sparring with Motobe, and having sidestepped Musashi days before their battle, Retsu is just not skilled or strong enough to really push his opponent in any way. By Retsu's own demand, the battle they have in the underground arena shall include weapons for the first time, as Retsu's pride would not allow him to achieve a victory against Musashi if he was unable to use blades. It's admirable, but foolish of Retsu to assume he could even beat Musashi in unarmed combat. The thing about Retsu is his demise was probably always quite likely to happen at some point, and that's because Retsu is a true warrior. Now, don't get me wrong, Baki, Yujiro, Doppo, Jack, and all the others are also true warriors that place their lives on the line and are willing to die for their ideals, but with Retsu, it's different. Retsu feels the weight of 4,000 years of Chinese Kempo on his shoulders and will live and die by their teachings. And with that heritage behind you, I don't think that most of the other fighters come clear to having the same kind of resolve or pressure put on them as Retsu does. Again, please don't get me wrong, all the other fighters have equally valid reasons to fight to the death at the drop of a hat, but Retsu just carries more than most can even imagine. So with the anime around the corner and with this fight soon to be shown fully animated, I hope, please don't record a Ragnarok this fight. I'm going to lightly cover the fight rather than give an intense breakdown. Before the fight begins, we the audience witness Retsu learning Shaori, the art of relaxing to the point that attacks have no effect on their practitioner, even bladed weapon attacks. How long have you been in here? My cat's just appeared from under my bed. When Kaku claims that not even a blade can cut a feather, which is the game of Shaori, we then cut to Musashi, who effortlessly slices a feather into 4. Yeah. The writing was on the wall for Retsu from the start. During the fight itself, Retsu initially maintains a safe distance from Musashi, choosing to throw knives, sand, anything, which Musashi easily repels or dodges. Upon entering into each other's area of combat, Musashi snatches Retsu's chain whip from his hand and destroys it simply by swinging it with his strength, something that stings Kaioh Kaku, who claims to have never been able to do something like this himself. Kaioh Kaku is the 140-year-old Chinese Kempo master, by the way, in case that wasn't obvious. After some punches and kicks are exchanged, Retsu is rendered unconscious, and in that Retsu way that we've become familiar with, his body moves on its own to defend him. I should also say that he's knocked out as a result of Musashi swinging him like a sword. Having suffered some humiliation up to this point, Musashi takes it a step further by feigning injury and using this opportunity to bind Retsu into a ball. You good? Feeling the shame of having had his movements completely sealed, Retsu demands that Musashi cut him down. Musashi tells him he'll cut him down if he feels like it, exercising his control over Retsu whilst going on to praise him for his strength. He cuts Retsu free of his bindings, and as Retsu turns, Musashi aims to slice him right down the middle. Retsu responds by using Shaori like he had done so previously, but the man they call Musashi cuts true, defeating Retsu, Shaori, and 4,000 years of Chinese Kempo. Not accepting of defeat, a seriously injured Retsu prepares to charge Musashi again, who moves to slice him in 2. Retsu, to the amazement of Musashi, stops his swing by lodging the blade in his own fist. Musashi moves quickly to launch Retsu in the air, who, as he touches the ground and uses Shaori to counter Musashi's next swing, is defeated once again. And as Retsu stands there with 2 slashes to his body, his killer turns and walks away, leaving a feather split in 2. It's not instant death for Retsu. He kneels and feels the true pain of being cut. He knows his organs and spine have been sliced in 2. He vomits blood and thinks about how he can counter Musashi's next move, before he finally passes away. Retsu dies upholding the ideals and beliefs of Chinese Kempo. It was an outcome that seemed destined since his defeat at the hands of Pickle. Having been shown previously that there are just some opponents that one can never defeat, Retsu decided to attempt it anyway. He can be commended for this, but ultimately the shock of his death and defeat leaves an abrupt and sour note with the audience. Here is a main character in the series dying, which isn't something we've yet experienced in Baki. We've had characters be defeated, maimed, and retired, but none have yet been killed in or out of the ring. It's incredibly important that this happened specifically to Retsu, as he was always someone that was willing to die in any fight they took part in. Retsu was a true warrior, but what does that mean in the modern era when battles to the death are, shall we say, uncommon? When tested by a man like Musashi, who never hesitates to kill his enemies, or in fact just anyone in his way, this serves as a stark warning to the others who then go on to challenge him. It's a warning, but not a deterrent, as familiar faces still look to challenge the ancient samurai Miyamoto Musashi. This is the second time that Retsu has been used as a measure of how powerful a series antagonist is, and that's what finally ended him. Sort of. I mean, if you really want more Retsu stuff, you can go and read his isekai adventure, but I don't think I ever will. So I guess that's Retsu. Started off and maintained his status as a seriously strong martial artist. However, basically, power creep just got the better of him, which sucks, but that's the way it is. That took a very sad turn. Well, if you're still watching by this point, then I'd like to say thank you for doing so. This video is definitely longer than most of mine so far, and I really am taking a wild swing at this. I'm pretty tired now. I'm gonna go to bed, so say hi to your mum from me, and peace.